July 4, 1961, the Soviet submarine K-19 suffered a severe reactor failure in the North Atlantic. Historically, the crew improvised a cooling system and prevented a meltdown, but that survival was a statistical anomaly. The underlying physics point to a much darker, highly probable alternate reality, a catastrophic explosion. In the late 1950s, the United States successfully advanced its submarine-launched ballistic missile capabilities with the Polaris program. To counter this, the Soviet Union rushed their Project 658 class, the Hotel class, into immediate production. Standard submarine development requires rigorous testing cycles to ensure structural and nuclear integrity. The Soviet military-industrial complex discarded that timeline, prioritizing deployment speed over foundational engineering safety. The human cost of this rushed construction was immediate. During the initial building and testing phases, 3 civilian workers died in a fire during ballast tank assembly. Later, 6 women were killed by toxic fumes while gluing rubber lining to a cistern. These latent defects and lethal accidents earned the vessel a dark nickname among shipyard workers long before it saw active service, the Widowmaker. Despite its compromised state, the Soviet Navy placed a 139-man crew inside the vessel and sent it into the North Atlantic for its first missile-firing voyage. Every latent defect and rushed decision ensured the K-19 entered the Atlantic as a preordained systemic failure, making a catastrophic event almost inevitable. The localized catalyst for this alternate timelines disaster began during construction. A single drop of welding solder fell and compromised the integrity of a pipe in an inaccessible section of the primary cooling circuit. On July 4th, that compromised pipe failed. The resulting leak caused a massive pressure drop in the starboard VMA pressurized water reactor, a unit generating 70 megawatts of thermal power. These first-generation reactors lacked the redundant safety features found in modern nuclear installations. Most critically, the K-19 had no backup cooling mechanism to flood the core if the primary loop failed. The crew initiated a scram, an emergency insertion of control rods to halt the fission chain reaction. But without coolant flow, the decay heat from lingering fission products caused the core temperature to spike toward 800 degrees Celsius. The reactor core contained highly enriched uranium clad in zircaloy. Boiling steam reacted with hot zircaloy, outputting zirconium dioxide, heat, and highly explosive hydrogen gas. This chart tracks the compromised core's temperature. Crossing the 1500 Kelvin threshold makes the reaction self-sustaining, mathematically guaranteeing a total core melt. Without the historical crew's suicidal fix, the failure of a single poorly welded pipe cascades into a runaway thermodynamic meltdown. When the nulting core breaches the pressure vessel and drops into the water filling the reactor compartment, it triggers a molten fuel coolant interaction, or MFCI. This is a thermodynamic expansion. The molten corium instantly vaporizes the water, expanding its volume 1,600 times in a fraction of a second. The efficiency of this thermal to mechanical energy conversion can reach 40% in a reactor environment. For a 70-megawatt reactor, this generates enough mechanical work to shatter the K-19's outer hull. The destruction of the submarine is only the first phase of the disaster. In 1961, the North Atlantic was a hyper-monitored underwater acoustic battlefield. This map shows how sound propagates in the region. The deep ocean contains a layer known as the SO-FAR channel, which transmits sound waves with extraordinary efficiency. A hull-rupturing explosion off the coast of Greenland would be heard across the entire ocean basin. The wave intersects directly with the U.S. Navy's SOSS network. SOSS was a system of underwater hydrophones designed to track Soviet submarines, heavily concentrated in the GIUK gap, the choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. In an instant, a thermodynamic explosion deep underwater registers as a highly visible military event on Western radar. This acoustic detection would have occurred in July 1961, during the absolute height of the Berlin crisis. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had recently issued a 6-month ultimatum demanding that Western powers withdraw entirely from West Berlin. In response, President John F. Kennedy delivered a televised address requesting an additional $3.25 billion to increase U.S. military and anti-submarine defense capabilities. The K-19 explosion occurred off the southeast coast of Greenland. This placed the detonation dangerously close to the Thule Space Base, a vital U.S. installation housing early warning systems and strategic bombers. In 1961, acoustic analysis technology could not distinguish between a reactor accident and a deliberate weapon detonation. U.S. intelligence would interpret a massive, unidentified blast near their early warning infrastructure as a deliberate Soviet provocation. The escalation would be immediate. NATO activates its secret maritime contingency plans, while Strategic Air Command places half of its B-52 bomber fleet on a 15-minute ground alert, fully loaded with nuclear weapons. Because the K-19's long-range radio was broken, Moscow could not explain the incident. The fog of war turns a silent industrial accident into the perceived opening salvo of World War III. Beyond the immediate military escalation, the physical hull breach releases the reactor's entire radioactive inventory. Approximately 3.5 million curies of highly radioactive mixed fission products are injected directly into the North Atlantic current system. Oceanography dictates the spread. The radioactive plume gets caught in the East Greenland Current, flowing southward along the coast before wrapping around Cape Farewell and heavily contaminating the Labrador Sea. This triggers an epizootic spread. Phytoplankton absorb the dissolved radionuclei. As zooplankton consume the phytoplankton and larger fish consume the zooplankton, the radioactivity concentrates as it moves rapidly up the marine food chain. Elements with 30-year half-lives, specifically cesium-137 and strontium-90, bioaccumulate aggressively, embedding directly into the muscle tissue and bone structures of the fish. The immediate detection of this contamination triggers a total international embargo on all North Atlantic seafood. The economic devastation hits the Canadian Atlantic provinces instantly. A processing industry valued at $200 million collapses, leaving 80,000 fishermen permanently unemployed. Driven by public fear, the market collapse extends far beyond the actual radiological plume, destroying the fishing-dependent regional economies of neighboring nations like Norway. For Iceland, the moratorium is an extinction-level event. At the time, marine products accounted for up to 95% of the nation's total merchandise exports. The radiological plume effectively turns the North Atlantic into a nuclear nature. The resulting embargo would trigger national bankruptcy in Iceland and mass depopulation across the Canadian coast, creating a premature Great Depression for the entire North Atlantic basin. To measure the cost of the K-19 exploding, we move the timeline to October 1962, during the chaos of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Deep in the Caribbean, the Soviet submarine B-59 is cut off from radio contact with Moscow and is being hounded by U.S. Navy practice depth charges. Exhausted and under fire, the captain of the B-59 believes World War III has already begun. He orders the immediate arming and launch of a 10-kiloton nuclear torpedo. Protocol dictated that the launch required the unanimous consent of 3 senior officers. This introduces a critical human variable, Vasily Arkhipov, the chief of staff of the submarine flotilla. In our real timeline, Arkhipov used his authority and reputation to countermand the captain's order. He refused to approve the launch and single-handedly prevented a nuclear strike. The historical divergence lies in Arkhipov's background. In July 1961, he was the executive officer on the K-19. His absolute resolve in 1962 was forged by watching his men die of radiation poisoning during that exact reactor failure. In the alternate timeline where the K-19 explodes off Greenland, Arkhipov dies in 1961, along with the rest of the crew. That removes the only human circuit breaker capable of stopping the B-59. Without Arkhipov present in October 1962, the B-59 captain's order goes unchallenged. A nuclear torpedo is fired into the American blockade. The destruction of an American naval vessel forces a direct response from the United States, triggering a full-scale, retaliatory global nuclear exchange. This flowchart maps the cascading chain reaction. A microscopic drop of solder causes a localized leak. That leak causes a thermodynamic steam explosion. The explosion kills a specific naval officer, and his absence permits a global nuclear strike. In the nuclear age, industrial safety serves as the primary defense for the human variables, the circuit breakers like Arkhipov, who stand between mechanical failure and escalation. The line between localized mechanical failure and nuclear exchange is often drawn by a few individuals in the dark, irradiated heart of a failing machine.